Hi everybody, and welcome back to another Mindful Whispers video. Today I wanted to very calmly read through the documentation of MKUltra as it appears on Wikipedia. I know this might be a strange topic to relax to, but I invite you to keep an open mind and drift off into a state of relaxation while you question your own government and question the authority that it holds. I wanted to originally go into the vast leaked CIA documentation of MKUltra, but that video would have been several hours long, so consider this an abbreviation. And now we begin. Project MKUltra was an illegal human experiments program designed and undertaken by the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency to develop procedures and identify drugs that could be used during interrogations to weaken people and force confessions through brainwashing and psychological torture. It began in 1953 and was halted in 1973. MKUltra used numerous methods to manipulate its subjects' mental states and brain functions, such as the covert administration of high doses of psychoactive drugs, especially LSD, and other chemicals without the subject's consent. Electroshocks, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, verbal and sexual abuse, and other forms of torture were present. MKUltra was preceded by Project Artichoke. It was organized through the CIA's Office of Scientific Intelligence and coordinated with the United States Army Biological Warfare Laboratories. The program engaged in illegal activities, including the use of U.S. and Canadian citizens as unwitting test subjects. MKUltra's scope was broad, with activities carried out under the guise of research at more than 80 institutions aside from the military, including colleges, universities, hospitals, prisons, and pharmaceutical companies. The CIA operated using front organizations, although some top officials at these institutions were aware of the CIA's involvement. MKUltra was revealed to the public in 1975 by the Church Committee of the United States Congress and Gerald Ford's United States President's Commission on CIA Activities within the United States. Investigative efforts were hampered by CIA Director Richard Helms' order that all MKUltra files be destroyed in 1973. The Church Committee and Rockefeller Commission investigations relied on the sworn testimony of direct participants and on the small number of documents that survived Helms' orders. In 1977, a Freedom of Information Act request uncovered a cache of 20,000 documents relating to MKUltra, which led to Senate hearings. Some surviving information about MKUltra was declassified in 2001. Now with those 20,000 documents, you could see why I opted to do this abbreviated video. Now to discuss the origin of the project. During the early 1940s, Nazi scientists working in the concentration camps of Auschwitz and Dachau conducted interrogation experiments on human subjects. Substances such as barbiturates, morphine derivatives, and hallucinogens such as mescaline were employed in experiments conducted on Pole, Czech, Jewish, Soviet, and other nationalities' prisoners of war. This aimed to develop a truth serum, which would, in the words of one laboratory assistant to Dachau scientist Kurt Plotner, eliminate the will of the person examined. American historian Stephen Kinzer argues that the CIA project was a continuation of these earlier Nazi experiments, citing the numerous German scientists who were hired to work for the U.S. as part of Operation Paperclip. American interest in drug-related interrogation experiments began in 1943 when the Office of Strategic Services began developing a truth drug, which would produce uninhibited truthfulness in an interrogated person. In 1947, the United States Navy initiated Project Chatter, an interrogation program which saw the first testing of lysergic acid dithylamide, which is known as LSD-25, on human subjects. In 1950, the Central Intelligence Agency, under the direction of General Walter Bedell Smith, initiated a series of interrogation projects involving human subjects, beginning with the launch of Project Bluebird, officially renamed Project Artichoke, on August 20th of 1951. Directed and overseen by Brigadier General Paul F. Gaynor, the objective of Artichoke was to determine whether an individual could be made to involuntarily perform an act of attempted assassination. Morphine, mescaline, and LSD were all administered on unknowing CIA agents in an attempt to produce amnesia in the subjects. In addition, Project Artichoke aimed to employ certain viruses such as dengue fever as potential incapacitating agents. The next section is titled Aims and Leadership. The project was headed by Sidney Gottlieb, but began on the order of CIA Director Alan Dulles on April 13, 1953. Its aim was to develop mind-controlling drugs for use against the Soviet bloc in response to alleged Soviet, Chinese, and North Korean use of mind control techniques on U.S. prisoners of war during the Korean War. The CIA wanted to use similar methods on their own captives and was interested in manipulating foreign leaders with such techniques, devising several schemes to drug Fidel Castro. It often conducted experiments without the subject's knowledge or consent. In some cases, academic researchers were funded through grants from CIA front organizations, but were unaware that the CIA was using their work for these purposes. The project attempted to produce a perfect truth drug for interrogating suspected Soviet spies during the Cold War and to explore other possibilities of mind control. Subproject 54 was the Navy's top-secret perfect concussion program, which was supposed to use subaural frequency blast to erase memories. The program was never carried out. Most MKUltra records were destroyed in 1973 by order of CIA Director Richard Helms, so it's been difficult for investigators to gain a complete understanding of the more than 150 funded research subprojects sponsored by MKUltra and unrelated CIA programs. The project began during a period of what English journalist Rupert Cornwell described as paranoia at the CIA, when the U.S. had lost its nuclear monopoly and fear of communism was at its height. CIA counterintelligence chief James Jesus Angleton believed that a mole had penetrated the organization at the highest levels. The agency poured millions of dollars into studies examining ways to influence and control the mind and enhance its ability to extract information from resistant subjects during interrogation. Some historians assert that one goal of MKUltra and related CIA projects was to create a Manchurian Candidate-style subject. American historian Alfred McCoy has claimed that the CIA attempted to focus media attention on these sorts of ridiculous programs so that the public would not look at the research's primary goal, which was effective methods of interrogation. Well, we have to be quieter now. We have to be quieter now because maybe the CIA is listening to us. But the real reason is that you're probably closer to falling asleep. So I want to be conscientious of that. The next session is called Applications. The 1976 Church Committee report found that in the MK Delta program, drugs were used primarily as an aid to interrogations, but MKUltra/MK Delta materials were also used for harassment, discrediting, or disabling purposes. In 1964, MK Search CIA search commenced in 1965 and ended in 1971. The project was a joint project between the U.S. Army Chemical Corps and the CIA's Office of Research and Development to find new offensive use agents with a focus on incapacitating agents. The purpose was to develop, test, and evaluate capabilities in the covert use of biological, chemical, and radioactive material systems and techniques of producing predictable human behavior and or physiological changes in support of highly sensitive operational requirements. By March of 1971, over 26,000 potential agents had been acquired for future screening. The CIA was interested in bird migration patterns for chemical and biological warfare research. Subproject 139, designated Bird Disease Studies at Penn State. MKUltra was to deal with testing and toxicological transmissivity and behavioral effects of drugs in animals and ultimately humans. MK was concerned with acquiring information on how new drug developments in Europe and Asia, and with acquiring samples. By January of 1957, the CIA started a subproject of MKUltra in effort to broaden their scientific research. Subproject 68, conducted at the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal under the direction of psychiatrist Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron, represents one of the most infamous and ethically controversial endeavors within the MKUltra program. This subproject aimed to explore innovative techniques for manipulating and controlling human behavior, particularly through the methods of psychic driving and patterning. Psychic depriving involved subjecting patients to continuous playback of recorded messages, often with themes of self-improvement or identity reinforcement, while they were under the influence of powerful psychoactive substances, such as LSD or barbiturates. Experiments on Americans. CIA documents suggest that they investigated chemical, biological, and radiological methods of mind control as part of MKUltra. They spent an estimated $10 million or more, roughly $87.5 million, adjusted for inflation. During a hearing done by the Senate Health Subcommittee, a testimony by Deputy Director of the CIA stated that over 30 institutions and universities were involved in the government program of testing drugs on unknowing citizens at all social levels, high and low, Native Americans and foreign, with several of these tests involving the issuing of LSD to unaware subjects in social situations. The Army was subject to the testing of LSD, which occurred in 3 phases. The first phase included over 1,000 Americans who willingly volunteered for testing of chemical warfare experiments. Phase 2 had 96 volunteers who were induced with LSD in evaluation of the possibility of intelligence uses of the drug. The third phase included projects Third Chance and Derby Hat, which conducted experiments on 16 unwitting, non-volunteer subjects that after receiving LSD were interrogated as part of Operation Field Tests. And now, the LSD. In 1943, LSD was created by Dr. Albert Hofmann at the Sandoz Laboratories in Basel, Switzerland. The early directors of MKUltra became aware of the existence of LSD and sought to use it for mind control. In the early 1950s, MKUltra director Sidney Gottlieb arranged for the CIA to buy the entire supply of LSD for $240,000, which in This LSD supply gave Gottlieb the ability to now fulfill his experiment by spreading LSD to prisons, hospitals, institutions, clinics, and foundations in order to see how citizens would react to the drug without knowing exactly what is happening to themselves. Early CIA efforts focused on LSD-25, which later came to dominate many MKUltra programs. The CIA wanted to know if they could make Soviet spies defect against their will, and whether the Soviets could do the same to the CIA's own operatives. Documents obtained from the CIA by John D. Marks under the Freedom of Information Act in 1976 showed that in 1953, the CIA purchasing 10 kilograms of LSD, which was enough for 100 million doses. The proposed purchase aimed to stop other countries from controlling the supply. The documents showed that the CIA purchased some quantities of LSD from Sandoz Laboratories in Switzerland. Once Project MKUltra got underway in April of 1953, experiments included administering LSD to mental patients, prisoners, drug addicts, and prostitutes. Quote, people who could not fight back, as one agency officer put it. In one case, they administered LSD to a mental patient in Kentucky for 174 days. They also administered LSD to CIA employees, military personnel, doctors, other government agents, and members of the general public to study their reactions. The aim was to find drugs that would bring out deep confessions or wipe a subject's mind clean and program them as a robot agent. Military personnel who received the mind-altering drugs were also threatened with court-martials if they told anyone about the experiments. LSD and other drugs were often administered without the subject's knowledge or informed consent, a violation of the Nuremberg Code the U.S. had agreed to follow after World War II. Many veterans who were subjected to experimentation are now seeking legal and monetary reparations. In Operation Midnight Climax, the CIA set up several brothels within agency safe houses in San Francisco to obtain a selection of men who would be too embarrassed to talk about the events. The men were dosed with LSD. The brothels were equipped with one-way mirrors, and the sessions were filmed for later viewing and study. In other experiments where people were given LSD without their knowledge, they were interrogated under bright lights with doctors in the background taking notes. They told subjects they would extend their trips if they refused to reveal their secrets. The people under this interrogation were CIA employees, U.S. military personnel, and agents suspected of working for the other side of the Cold War. Long-term debilitation and several deaths resulted from this. Heroin addicts were bribed into taking LSD with offers of more heroin. At the invitation of Stanford psychology graduate student Vic Lavelle, an acquaintance of Allen Ginsberg, Ken Kesey volunteered to take part in what turned out to be a CIA finance study under the aegis of MKUltra at the Menlo Park Veterans Hospital, where he worked as a night aide. The project studied the effects of psychoactive drugs, particularly LSD, psilocybin, mescaline, cocaine, AMT, and DMT on people. The Office of Security used LSD in interrogations, but Sidney Gottlieb, the chemist who directed MKUltra, had other ideas. He thought it could be used in covert operations. Since its effects were temporary, he believed it could be given to high-ranking officials, and in this way affect the course of important meetings, speeches, etc. Since he realized there was a difference in testing the drug in a laboratory and using it in clandestine operations, he initiated a series of experiments where LSD was given to people in normal settings without warning. At first, everyone in technical services tried it. A typical experiment involved two people in a room where they observed each other for hours and took notes. As the experimentation progressed, a point arrived where outsiders were drugged with no explanation whatsoever, and surprise acid trips became something of an occupational hazard among CIA operatives. Adverse reactions often occurred, such as an operative who received the drug in his morning coffee, became psychotic, and ran across Washington, D.C. seeing a monster in every car passing him. The experiments continued even after Frank Olson, an Army chemist who had never taken LSD, was covertly dosed by his CIA supervisor, and 9 days later plunged to his death from the window of a 13th-story New York City hotel room, supposedly as a result of deep depression induced by the drug. According to Stephen Gittinser, Olson had approached his superior sometime earlier, doubting the morality of the project, and asked to resign from the CIA. Some subjects' participation was consensual, and in these cases they appeared to be singled out for even more extreme experiments. In one case, 7 drug-addicted African-American volunteers at the National Institute of Mental Health Addiction Research Center in Kentucky were given LSD for 77 consecutive days. MKUltra's researchers later dismissed LSD as too unpredictable in its results. They gave up on the notion that LSD was the secret that was going to unlock the universe, but it still had a place in the cloak and dagger arsenal. However, by 1962, the CIA and the Army developed a series of super hallucinogens, such as the highly touted BZ, which was thought to hold greater promise as a mind control weapon. This resulted in the withdrawal of support by many academics and private researchers, and LSD research became less of a priority altogether. Another technique investigated was the intravenous administration of a barbiturate into one arm and an amphetamine into the other. The barbiturates were released into the person first, and as soon as the person began to fall asleep, the amphetamines were released. Other experiments involved heroin, morphine, temazepam, mescaline, psilocybin, scopolamine, alcohol, and sodium pentothal. This last paragraph is labeled Hypothesis. Declassified MKUltra documents indicate that they studied hypnosis, not hypothesis. Hypnosis. Declassified MKUltra documents indicate that they studied hypnosis in the early 1950s. Experimental goats included creating hypnotically induced anxieties, hypnotically increasing ability to learn and recall complex written matter, studying hypnosis and polygraph examinations, hypnotically increasing ability to observe and recall complex arrangements of physical objects, and studying relationship of personality to susceptibly hypnotize. They conducted experiments with drug-induced hypnosis and with anterograde and retrograde amnesia while under the influence of such drugs. This next section is titled Experiments on Canadians. The CIA exported experiments to Canada when they recruited Scottish psychiatrist Donald Ewan Cameron, the creator of psychic driving concepts, which the CIA found interesting. Cameron had been hoping to correct schizophrenia by erasing existing memories and reprogramming the psyche. He commuted from Albany, New York to Montreal every week to work on the Allen Memorial Institute of McGill University and was paid $69,000 from 1957 to 1964, which in 24, adjusted for inflation, is nearly $800,000. To carry out MKUltra experiments there, the Montreal Experiments Research Funds were sent to Cameron by a CIA-front organization, the Society for Investigation of the Human Ecology, and as shown in internal CIA documents, Cameron did not know the money came from the CIA. In addition to LSD, Cameron also experimented with various paralytic drugs as well as electroconvulsive therapy at 30 to 40 times the normal power. His driving experiments consisted of putting subjects into drug-induced comas for weeks at a time lasted up to 3 months in one case, while playing tape loops of noise or simple repetitive statements. His experiments were often carried out on patients who entered the institute for common problems such as anxiety disorders and postpartum depression, many of whom suffered permanent effects from his actions. His treatments resulted in victims' urinary incontinence, amnesia, forgetting how to talk, forgetting their parents, and thinking their interrogators were their parents. During this era, Cameron became known worldwide as the first chairman of the World Psychiatric Association, as well as president of both the American Psychiatric Association and the Canadian Psychiatric Association. Cameron was also a member of the Nuremberg Medical Tribunal from 1946 to 1947. His work was inspired and paralleled by the British psychiatrist William Sargent at the St. Thomas Hospital in London and Belmont Hospital in Sutton, who was also involved in the Secret Intelligence Service, and who experimented on his patients without their consent, causing similar long-term damage. In the 1980s, several of Cameron's former patients sued the CIA for damages, which the Canadian news program The Fifth Estate documented. Their experiments and their lawsuit was adapted in the 1998 television miniseries The Sleep Room. Naomi Klein argues in her book, The Shock Doctrine, that Cameron's research and his contributions to the MKUltra program was not about mind control and brainwashing, but designing a scientifically based system for extracting information from resistant sources. In other words, torture. Alfred W. McCoy writes, stripped of its bare excesses, Dr. Cameron's experiments, building upon Donald O. Hebb's earlier breakthrough, laid the scientific foundation for the CIA's two-stage psychological torture method, referring to first creating a state of disorientation in the subject, and then creating a situation of self-inflicted discomfort in which the disoriented subject can alleviate pain by capitulating. This next section is titled Secret Detention Camps. In areas under American control in the early 1950s in Europe and East Asia, mostly Japan, West Germany, and the Philippines, the CIA created several detention centers so that the U.S. could avoid criminal prosecution. The CIA captured people suspected of being enemy agents and other people it deemed expendable to undertake various types of torture and human experimentation on them. The prisoners were interrogated while being administered psychoactive drugs, electroshocked, and subjected to extremes of temperature, sensory isolation, and the like to develop a better understanding of how to destroy and control human minds. This next section is called Relevation. In 1973, amid a government-wide panic caused by Watergate, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered all MKUltra files destroyed. Pursuant to this order, most CIA documents regarding the project were destroyed, making a full investigation of MKUltra impossible. A cache of some 20,000 documents survived Helms' purge, as they had been incorrectly stored in a financial records building and were discovered following a FOIA request in 1977. These documents were fully investigated during the Senate hearings of 1977. In December of 1974, the New York Times alleged that the CIA had conducted illegal domestic activities, including experiments on U.S. citizens during the 1960s. That report prompted investigations by the United States Congress in the form of the Church Committee, and by a commission known as the Rockefeller Commission that looked into the illegal domestic activities of the CIA, the FBI, and intelligence-related agencies of the military. In the summer of 1975, Congressional Church Committee reports and the Presidential Rockefeller Commission report revealed to the public for the first time that the CIA and the Department of Defense had conducted experiments on both unwitting and cognizant human subjects as part of an extensive program to find out how to influence and control human behavior through the use of psychoactive drugs such as LSD and mescaline and other chemicals, biological and psychological means. They also revealed that at least one subject, Frank Olson, had died after the administration of LSD. Much of what the Church Committee and the Rockefeller Commission learned was contained in a report prepared by the Inspector General's office in 1963 that had survived the destruction of the records, which occurred in 1973. However, it contained little detail. Sidney Gottlieb, who had retired from the CIA 2 years previously and headed MKUltra, was interviewed by committee, but claimed to have very little recollection of the activities within MKUltra. The Congressional Committee investigating the CIA research, chaired by Senator Frank Church, concluded that prior consent was obviously not obtained from any of the subjects. The committee noted that the experiments sponsored I apologize, I lost my spot. The committee noted that the experiments sponsored by these researchers call into question the decision by the agencies not to fix the guidelines for experiments. Following the recommendations of the Church Committee, President Gerald Ford in 1976 issued the first executive order on intelligence activities, which, among other things, prohibited experimentation with drugs on human subjects, except with the informed consent in writing and witnessed by a disinterested party of each such human subject, and in accordance with the guidelines issued by the National Commission. Subsequent orders by Presidents Carter and Reagan expanded the directive to apply to any human experimentation. In 1977, during a hearing held by the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence to look further into MKUltra, Admiral Stansfield Turner, then Director of Central Intelligence, revealed that the CIA had found a set of records consisting of about 20,000 pages that had survived the 1973 destruction orders because they had been incorrectly stored at the record center not usually used for such documents. These files dealt with the financing of MKUltra projects and contained few project details, but much more was learned from them than from the Inspector General's 1963 report. On the Senate floor in 1977, Senator Ted Kennedy said, quote, "The Deputy Director of the CIA revealed that over 30 universities and institutions were involved in an extensive testing and experimentation program, which included covert drug tests on unwitting citizens at all social levels, high and low, Native Americans and foreign. Several of these tests involved the administration of LSD to unwitting subjects in social situations." End quote. At least one death, the result of the alleged defenestration of Frank Olson, was attributed to Olson's being subjected without his knowledge to such experimentation 9 days before his death. The CIA itself subsequently acknowledged that these tests had little scientific rationale. The officers conducting the monitors were not qualified scientific observers. In Canada, the issue took much longer to surface, becoming widely known in 1984 on a CBC news show, The Fifth Estate. It was learned that not only had the CIA funded Cameron's efforts, but also that the Canadian government was fully aware of this and had later provided another $500,000 in funding to continue the experiments. This revelation was largely derailed efforts by the victims to sue the CIA, as their U.S. counterparts had, and the Canadian government eventually settled out of court for $100,000 to each of the 127 victims. Cameron died on September 8th of 1967 after suffering a heart attack while he and his son were mountain climbing. None of Cameron's personal records of his involvement with MKUltra survived because his family destroyed them after his death. And that seems like a fitting place to end this. I've been whispering for quite a while now. There's much, much more information here that I would happily make a sequel video about if this performs well, but you let me know what you'd like me to whisper about next in the comments. Ideally, you are sound asleep right now, but if you're still with me at the end of this video, I hope that you're soothed. I hope you're doing well. And if by some weird chance me whispering about bizarre government conspiracies and confirmed conspiracies makes you happy in any way, shape, or form, well, I hope that you've enjoyed this, and I appreciate you taking the time to interact with and observe something that I created as it may be. I appreciate your viewership